Things like healthcare, right? Medicare, right now, still, Medicare cannot negotiate lower drug prices with prescription drug companies. By law, they are prohibited in America, land of the free. And what happens as a result? People who are most in need of care struggle to make these decisions. Well, am I going to buy the medicine that I need for myself or my loved one? Or pay the rent or make sure we've got food in the fridge? How's that allowed to happen? It happens because you've got the influence of big pharmaceutical companies and their lobbyists in Washington who have a hand in writing that legislation that benefits them and hurts the people. We see this in our criminal justice system, families being torn apart because of how broken and destructive our current criminal justice system is, how devastating this failed war on drugs has been. And you see private prisons whose whole business model is making money off of keeping more people in prison. Rather than saying, hey, how do we as a country help end this cycle of those who go through this criminal justice system? How do we reduce these recidivism rates? How do we actually help folks who are coming out of our prisons be empowered, be successful, walk down that path towards recovery and a new life? We see in the opioid crisis that we're facing now. It's devastating communities all across the country. In my home state of Hawaii, we've got a population of about 1.3 million people. Over 500,000 active opioid prescriptions. Devastating, and we are not even the hardest hit in communities across this country. So what are we doing about it? You hear a lot of politicians saying, hey, there's an opioid crisis, we've got to do something about it. Some of them are saying, hey, let's go and pass legislation that will give more money, in some cases, to the same drug companies that are making these highly addictive opioids and lying about how addictive they are, because they've just created a drug that they want to sell to help people who are addicted to opioids. See something wrong with that picture?
Yeah.
Congress has still failed to pass legislation that would end the federal prohibition on marijuana. What does that have to do with the opioid crisis? Well, in states, over 33 states that have legalized either medicinal use or adult use of marijuana, there's been a direct correlation and a reduction of those who are struggling with opioid addiction, and there's been a reduction in opioid-related deaths. Why hasn't Congress done something about it? Each of these goes to the heart of the problem, that we have a government that is not of, by, and for the people, that is not making decisions in each of these most direct and central policies that impact our lives, thinking, how can we best serve the people? Instead, they're sitting around a table with the most high-powered, high-paid lobbyists who have their own interests helping to shape these policies, and we, the people, suffer and get left behind every single time. But that's why we're here. That's why you stood outside for so long. Because this is important to every single one of us, and we know that no change happens unless each and every one of us stands up to make sure that our voices are heard. Standing united, standing together, putting these principles of service above self at the forefront, so that we can make sure that those who we hire to serve us in government, because that's what you're doing with your vote. You're making that decision of who you would like to hire or fire. And making sure that those who we hire are truly of, by, and most importantly for the people. Leaders who represent these values of service above self, putting their own selfish interests behind, and instead thinking about how can we best serve the people? How can we best protect our planet? Recognizing that even as we are guided and inspired by this ideal of service above self, we may have different approaches to solving problems. Talk about healthcare. We may have different ideas on how best to make sure that people who are sick in this country are able to get the care they need, which is great. It's fine. Let's have those conversations so that we can come up with the strongest solution to achieve that objective. But that process is not even allowed to happen when you have big insurance and big pharma sitting at the table, writing healthcare legislation that benefits them, and where our voices are left out. This is the kind of change that we're seeking to bring. This is the kind of change that I'll bring to the White House as your president. putting these values of service above self. These values of service above self, they're at the heart of every service member I've had the privilege of serving with. You know, those of us who've raised our hands to put our lives on the line for this country, those who I've served with through my 2 deployments, whereas we're deployed, this is not about Democrats, Republicans, it's not about being black, brown, or white, or Hindu, or Christian, or Muslim, or atheist. No. All of those things fall to the side as we stand together focused on putting that mission of service first. And when we do that, then we can make big change, not just tweak around the edges, but make the big change we need to see by passing legislation like Medicare for All that would make it so that any sick American is able to get the care they need, no matter how much or how little they have in their bank account. I was talking with someone yesterday who shared a story about his daughter. You know, we were talking, he's asking me, when you go to different communities in the country, what are the issues that are top of mind? What are the things people are concerned about? Are they the same in New York as they are in small town in New Hampshire? Or a rural community, farming community in Iowa? Or in my communities in Hawaii? How are these things different? And what I shared with him is, everywhere I go, healthcare is an issue that is the top issue for people. Concerned about their loved ones, that even those who have good paying jobs, who have great insurance, are still one healthcare emergency away from bankruptcy. And he shared how his daughter, who is working in the UK, he asked her, what's the healthcare system there like? She said, you know, it's probably about 95% of what the quality of healthcare in the United States is, but nobody there worries about getting the care they need. Nobody worries about if they have a sick child. Will they be able to afford for their child to get the care they need? And that really struck me, that contrast between what people are most concerned about here versus what we have in other industrial countries. People don't even think about it. It's not on their mind. They've got a lot of other issues they're concerned about. That is not the one that's in the top of their mind. When we stand united, we can make big change that puts the well-being of people first, ahead of profits and ahead of partisan politics. We're able to enact big change in our broken criminal justice system. Yes, by passing legislation like the one I've introduced to end the federal prohibition on marijuana, taking it completely off of the controlled substances list. We can pass big change by banning private prisons, by ending the cash bail system that benefits the rich and discriminates and punishes the poor. We can enact true sentencing reform and end this failed war on drugs. We can make big investments to protect our environment, to address climate change, to invest in renewable energy, to usher in a green century that harnesses all of our creativity and innovation, the incredible resources that we have, towards building this green renewable future. By making sure that every person in this country has clean water to drink. Clean air to breathe. I think it is a travesty that here in the United States of America, it is not a guarantee that each of us has clean water. That our kids in Flint, Michigan are not being poisoned by the water coming out of their tap. Flint has not been in the headlines for quite some time, but I visited there a little while ago and people are still dealing with highly polluted water. A mother shared with me how she can't even take a shower in her own home, otherwise she'll break out in sores. These things are happening here in the United States. It's a community in New Hampshire where I went and visited. Their water is completely polluted by an industrial business that is continuing to dump toxins into their water system. It's crazy, but this is happening right now. Why? Because people in positions of power are putting their selfish interests ahead of the interests of the people. You see this theme here in every major challenge that we face. And that is how we find the solution. That is how we find the solution. Now, in order to address and make the kinds of investments we need to in healthcare and education and infrastructure and our environment, we've got to address one central issue, and that is the cost of war. This is something that's deeply personal to me as a soldier. I've served over 16 years in the Army National Guard, deployed twice to the Middle East. The first was to Iraq in 2005, where I served in a medical unit, where every single day it was heart-wrenching to see that high human cost of war. It was heartbreaking to be standing in the chow line with somebody one day and the next day, stand with my fellow soldiers and pay tribute to their empty boots and helmet and rifle because they had just been blown up by an IED that morning. We talk about the cost of war. It's deeply personal to those of us who've served, who've lost our friends, who've seen others come home with visible and invisible wounds. It's high human cost that is not only paid for by our troops and our veterans, but by the people in the countries where we wage these wars. The incredible loss of life, the suffering and the devastation, the refugee crises that we see, the pain that is endured. But the fact is, when we talk about the cost of war, every single one of us here is paying. Every single one of us is paying for the cost of war. Every time you're told by a politician saying, sorry, we just don't have enough money to make sure your roads are safe, that your bridges are safe, that you have clean water to drink, we just don't have enough money to make sure that you can get the health care you need. Why is that? Because there are trillions of our taxpayer dollars being pulled out of our pockets, being pulled out of our communities, being pulled out of the places where they're needed most, and continuing to be used to pay for these wasteful regime change wars that are counter to our interests in this country, that make us less safe, that strengthen terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're counter to the interests of the people in the countries where we're waging these wars. So as your President and Commander-in-Chief, I will end these wasteful regime change wars. I will work to end this new Cold War that we're in with ever-escalating tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, pushing us closer and closer to the brink of nuclear war, and the arms race that's making us and the world less safe, and is taking more money out of our pockets to pay for it. These things do not serve our purpose. And by doing that, by bringing about this sea change in our foreign policy that I seek to bring as your President, Commander-in-Chief, we will then be able to take those trillions that would otherwise continue to be wasted and invest it in serving the needs of our people. This is why this issue is so important. This is why this change is central to our ability to make the rest of the kinds of investments and changes that we need to make right here at home. Now, in order to do this, we know that the obstacles are great, right? We know there's a lot of people, a lot of industries that have benefited from this status quo for too long, who benefit from us continuing to be in this state of waging wars, regime change wars in other countries. But what is more powerful than all of their money, all of their clout, and all of their power? We, the people. We, the people. So don't underestimate the power that each of us has in our hands, in our hearts, in our voices, in our votes, to overcome these great obstacles. We have to know in our heart of hearts that when we stand united, motivated by this love and care for each other and for our country and for our planet, there is no obstacle that we cannot overcome. And making this kind of change will require every one of us standing together, standing united to bend this arc of history away from war and towards peace, towards that bright future that is safe and secure, filled with opportunity and prosperity and justice for every single American. And that's what I'm asking of you. I'm asking you to stand with me to do this, to put people ahead of profits, to put people and our planet ahead of partisan politics, and to bring these values and principles of service above self back to the White House, to make it so it is truly a beacon of light, where the voices of the people in this country are heard and represented and served. I want to close with a call to action here. If you like what you've heard, if the message that I'm delivering resonates with you, I need you to stand up and help to make sure that this message is heard in every part of our country. It is thanks to the support of people like you that we have qualified and are certain to have a spot on the debate stage. So I'm getting ready. We'll be in Miami in a couple of weeks for the first debate. We'll be But the DNC has just changed the standards for the next debates after that. So this is where, hey, we know what this, hey, I'd rather know what the standards are than just kind of toss it up to who knows what, right? So, look, we know what they are. We qualified for the first debates in 65,000 individual contributions. It's doubled. So we need to get 130,000 people. We got it, right? We got it. I love it. We got it. So if you haven't contributed already, or if you know people who haven't, this is where I need your help to make this happen, to make sure that our campaign will continue, that this message will continue to be heard and resonate with people all across the country, because there is so much at stake. It is our lives, it is our planet, it's our country, it's our future that's at stake. So you can get involved, Tulsi2020.com. I need every single one of you. Thank you.